presentation, I'm going to be going over the gene curation SOP updates that we have just released on August 12th. And I would really like to say that this is on behalf of the entire gene curation working group, small working group with members Aaron Riggs, Marina DeStefano, and Jenny Goldstein, and myself. And so first, I just want to direct you to the ClinGen website. And so for all of you, you can go on to ClinGen, to the Gene Disease Clinical Validity Training Materials, and see that at step 2, we have the standard operating procedure, and that is now updated to include the new version 7. Once you click on this link, you'll be taken to this next page for documents and announcements. And you can see and download a PDF version of the variant curation SOP, or excuse me, gene curation SOP version 7, as well as a summary of the updates and a text, as well as a highlighted version of that PDF to show you exactly the areas that we have updated. So I just want to review briefly the new additions that we have to this version 7 SOP. We are including a link to an optional hypothesis-assisted web annotation SOP for gene curation, and we'll go through this more. Establishing a gene disease mode of inheritance section, as well as the genetic evidence scoring section, recuration procedure, and the addition of the semi-dominant mode of inheritance, as well as undetermined mode of inheritance. We also have several updates that we included, and you will notice as you begin to read this, we have rearranged many of the sections as well as updated to accommodate our current workflow. Really, this was a removal of tallying of the points section because we widely use the gene curation interface, and we've condensed the overview of the gene curation. We also have inclusion of hyperlinks to external documents or data. This could help with the standard evidence summary text, as well as lumping and splitting guidelines and curatorial tools in general. We did give some updates to terminology, and this was in accordance with the GenCC Delphi survey. And we also have updated some of the images to illustrate our workflow, as well as some PMIDs that could be really important for curation in Appendix A. So I'm going to go through all of these new additions and these updates. As I said, we have included a hypothesis gene annotation SOP. We include that this is an optional measure, but this SOP is developed to assist evidence collection through this web-based annotation tool. And we have shown that it does reduce curation time and facilitate data transfer into the GCI. So we provide that hypothesis annotation assisted SOP at this link. You can also find it again on the Gene Disease Clinical Validity Training Materials under Additional Supporting Materials, and you'll find the hypothesis gene annotation SOP. If you do have any questions on how to use this tool for curation, you can contact myself, and there's my email. And just to be able to show you, we have also gone through and done the new gene curation SOP version is annotated using hypothesis. So for those of you that do want to try it out and see how it works, you can come back to these pages and look at the publicly available annotations to show you each of these annotations. And again, this would be the version 7 SOP. So similar to the highlighted version of PDF, you can actually have that available with the web-assisted annotation tool. So next we go through establishing the gene disease and mode of inheritance record. This was really important to include because this is how we begin our curation within the GCI, and so we really wanted to update to provide some points on what is required. So we start with the gene and indicate again the HDNC gene symbol is required to record, to do a record generation, and this is to even begin a curation record within the GCI. We also highlight the importance of gene aliases for identifying applicable literature. So while you do need the HDNC symbol, it does not prevent you as a biocurator to use any of these gene aliases or protein names to be able to find information for your curation. We do provide sites like HDNC and CBI gene as well as Ensemble as places to find these common aliases. And also we want to indicate that only one gene disease mode of inheritance record is allowed in the GCI, so there are no duplicative records. We only have a single classification, and we indicate that the gene tracking system or the gene tracker is what curators should use and talk to with their coordinators on the gene disease records for your specific group. The next part is defining the disease entity, and so this really in this section outlines the importance of those lumping and splitting guidelines that are mandated for use for gene curation, and this is to help assist curators and expert panels in defining the appropriate disease entity for your curation. We provide hyperlinks to those guidelines, the pre-curation template, an example for a pre-curation, and the video tutorial. That tutorial is also available on the gene curation training. We also alert curators that once, again, this gene disease mode of inheritance is entered in the GCI, that only the GCI developers can change that record. We have no ability ourselves. It is okay if this happens, and we have the information provided on who you would contact if you need to change that record. Next, we go into establishing the mode of inheritance. And so we've included an outline of the different mode of inheritance that are listed in the GCI and their ability to either score, calculate, or modify a classification and publish to the website. You can see the table to the right includes all of that salient information. We have also included 2 new mode of inheritance that you can use within the GCI and for gene curation. Those are undetermined mode of inheritance. And in general, we indicate to curators that gene disease mode of inheritance records that use an undetermined mode of inheritance should not be classified beyond limited. The reason for this is the fact that there is not much information to support this whole gene disease mode of inheritance record. We also introduced this new semi-dominant mode of inheritance. We define exactly what we mean by semi-dominant, and we also highlight the new Appendix C for more information on how you will calculate segregation from a semi-dominant inheritance and apply those scores to your gene disease mode of inheritance record and the final classification. Another new section that we have included is scoring variants and giving details about default and the range scores that are supplied for each of the categories for variants. We do indicate that the default score is intended to provide an initial suggestion for scoring. And this is really given the evidence for each case meets minimum criteria that were stated in the subsequent sections of the SOP. We do want to highlight and recognize, though, that expert panels may amend the criteria required to meet the default score based on specifications guided by the gene or disease entities under their purview. And as long as the score does not go above the maximum allowed per case in a given specified range, there is a little bit of modification of how you can apply a score based on these specifications. We do also find that expert panels may find it useful to provide a specifications for when to upgrade or downgrade from default, given the evidence may meet, exceed, or fall short of their specifications and expectations. Again, per the disease entity under their purview, and even looking at the given gene in that situation. We do highlight subsequent section titles for general considerations for variant scoring as well, just to lead to some more information. We then go into the genetic evidence matrix footnotes. And so to that evidence matrix, we did want to provide some more detailed information concerning the maximum points for case compared to the total genetic evidence. And so what you'll find is that for loss of function variants, the maximum points you can get for loss of function in that range is 10 points, which is below the total maximum for genetic evidence. The same for other variant types at 7 points. So this will indicate that you will need other lines of evidence, either case controls or experimental evidence, to get that gene disease mode of inheritance record to the 12 points in a definitive status. We also indicate that we would recommend curating a variety of variants where applicable. We do know that there are certain molecular mechanisms that follow, like loss of function. However, if there are missense that meet that loss of function criteria through variant evidence, to go ahead and curate those if you can apply that to your gene disease mode of inheritance record. For cases in which only one mechanism or variant type is found and there is a lack of experimental or segregation to increase points to a definitive range, we do provide guidance for how to manually modify this classification and the requirement of rationale to support this manual override. And so basically, again, this is if your experts feel that this gene disease mode of inheritance did not meet the score per the matrix and want to modify this classification, we provide the guidance and show you how you do that within the GCI. Next, we've added another new section called Recurrent Variants. And again, we want to highlight that this does provide general and flexible guidance for consideration when scoring recurring variants. And what it does initially is outline how a recurrent variant may arise in the literature. Some of those are because a single patient reported more than once in the literature. And so we would really want to target curators to review the details of each case to make sure that this is not the same patient being reported multiple times. while papers may go back and reference those previous papers, that is not always the case. And we just know that when in doubt, you want to only score one paper. Also, for the recurrent de novo variants, we know that there could be de novo variants that are recurring because it's a hot spot within that locus of that gene. You would want to confirm that de novo status with parental testing, which is similar to our de novo in general. And then you would score all cases per the general recommendations in the SOP or provided by your EP if they have specified for de novo. Another reason you could get a recurrent variant is because evidence suggests the variant arose in different populations. So while inherited, you would see that they come in totally separate populations. So if this variant is not de novo, you would score each case according to the variant type and that inheritance pattern. However, for cases with insufficient or no evidence to support the variant arising in different populations, we would ask that you reduce the points or potentially even score with 0 given the evidence that is supplied to avoid conflating the final score and classification. Next, we'll move on to founder variants, another new section. So just like recurrent variant, we wanted to provide general and flexible guidance for consideration when scoring founder variants. We do outline some examples of well-known founder variants that have been reported in the literature for different disease domains. We also provide guidance. We would prefer and kind of highlight and encourage people that if a valid case-controlled study is available for your variant in question, that's a founder variant, to please use this data and score it accordingly based on guidance within your expert panel. Then move to case-level data. And for case-level data, we would encourage the groups to curate a range of variants in addition to the known founder variant. This will ensure that the classification is not based on one or a limited number of variants. We do, however, recognize it may be appropriate to include additional cases for pathogenic founder variants, and this is at the discretion of experts, and this is in order to get it to a classification that they feel is appropriate for that gene disease mode of inheritance. However, we do want to say avoid double counting any cases that may have been included in case-controlled studies. So well-known founder variants should be noted either in the curation or in the curation summary. Some groups may decide not to score them, but you do definitely want to encourage noting these founder variants within the evidence curation summary. Also, for variants that are reported to be more common in specific populations, but are not well-known pathogenic founder variants, any evidence for the role of the variant in the disease must carefully be assessed to avoid overscoring a variant that is simply common in the population but has little evidence for causing the disease. Again, you don't want to inflate that classification. Also, functional data should be heavily relied upon to ensure that the variant is disruptive, not deleterious, but it does have an abnormal function or is disrupted to that gene, and not a benign variant in linked disequilibrium with the causative genetic change. Also, you want to score, as mentioned, for the known founder variants. And if all the genetic evidence has been curated in this manner and the classification has not reached a strong or definitive as expected by the expert panel, it may be appropriate to either score additional cases or to do that manual modification where we provide evidence. We also provide information on how to do that modification previously. I'll move on now to general variant scoring considerations. So we do have some updates to this, including for autosomal recessive scoring in trans. May I ask, can everybody please mute themselves if they're not talking? There's a lot of background noise here. Thank you. So we have updated criteria for assessing and scoring compound heterozygous autosomal recessive variants to align with the new guidance for PM3 supported by the SBI. And so for an individual who is compound heterozygous for 2 variants in the gene of interest, at least one parent should be tested and shown to carry one of the variants of interest. And so molecular methods showing the variants are in trans are also acceptable. We also added a section for known disease mechanism, and we do want to indicate if the disease mechanism is known, curators should not feel obligated to award default points for variants not aligned with the known disease mechanism. For example, if the disease mechanism is known to be gain of function, you may opt to award 0 points for putative loss of function variants. When in doubt of this, please consult with your experts on how to score. We also wanted to indicate some useful information around constraint metrics. and how they may be helpful when the disease mechanism is unknown and the disease is one that is expected to be depleted in population databases. We want to indicate that if data suggests a particular type of variant is common in the general population, to consider downgrading the score for that type of variant. For example, if you are evaluating a de novo missense variant in the context of unknown disease mechanism and the gene is not constrained for missense variation, you may want to consider downgrading from the default de novo score, especially in the absence of functional evidence to support it. And then we do indicate any previously stated caveats apply when you are evaluating constraint metrics. Next, we went into other new additions for specificity of phenotype and extent of previous testing. We do want to indicate that when you are curating for a relatively non-specific or a genetically heterogeneous condition, that you want to consider how confident you can be that alternative genetic causes of the disease have been ruled out. For example, consider downgrading your case or proband or variant that was identified during the course of a single gene testing in an individual with autism and no previous testing. You may also want to consider awarding default points if the variant was identified through whole exome or whole genome sequencing. Again, giving an indication that more genes were ruled out as a potential cause in this individual. When you're curating a more specific phenotype or one with limited genetic heterogeneity, a single gene test or limited multi-gene panel may be sufficient to rule out other genetic causes of this disease. For example, an enzyme assay that shows deficiency of the enzyme known to be associated with that single gene may be enough to award the default points for that variant. Next, we've included a little bit of a highlight from the recuration procedure. And so we do include this abbreviated table to outline the recuration procedure, and this is dependent on the classification of the gene, disease, mode of inheritance, as well as the time set to reevaluate. We also provide the hyperlink to the full recuration procedures that can be found on the gene curation training materials and the additional supporting material. Another new addition is the semi-dominant mode of inheritance, Appendix C. And so we do now have the inclusion of a semi-dominant mode of inheritance that allows scoring of individual case reports that have either autosomal dominant or autosomal recessive, as well as inclusion of segregation scoring for pedigrees displaying either autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, or the semi-dominant mode of inheritance. And this is within the same gene disease record. So for inclusion of semi-dominant, this is when the same disease entity can occur for a gene in either an autosomal dominant or recessive pattern. A very well-known example would be LDLR with familial hypercholesterolemia. And so for these individual case-level evidence, scoring of the variant will follow the individual mode of inheritance displayed or asserted by the authors for that particular case report. And for segregation, we want to have evaluation and scoring be prioritized based on the mode of inheritance displayed in the family being evaluated and includes either autosomal dominant, recessive, or semi-dominant. And so each one of those has to meet the criteria of either an autosomal dominant or recessive. Does anyone have any questions this far before I go through the updated sections? Okay, well, I'm going to continue on. So I do want to say that there were some general updates. We did refine and move a few of the sections, as I had mentioned, to accommodate new additions, as well as to reflect that current curation workflow. So you will see how it follows very much aligned with how the gene curation interface operates. We also added or updated hyperlinks for several internal documents, including the lumping and splitting guidelines, tutorial and video, the evidence summary standardized text, recuration procedure, and these useful curatorial tools. For one instance, we have updated Figure 1, again, to accommodate the new workflow. You will see that we have added a new section at the top indicating how pre-curation and disease entity assignment is required before you even go and enter in a gene disease mode of inheritance record into the GCI or begin curation. We also indicate that after you assess and score the evidence, you would need to assign a provisional clinical validity classification through the gene curation interface. And that then flags you to be able to begin expert review on your particular GSEP. And again, that after the final approval of classification, that you would publish that curation to the website through the gene curation interface. We also indicated how we had changes that took place on our gene curation matrix. So again, no known disease relationship is a new update, and we provide the information here that the no reported evidence has been changed as of August 2019 to align with the Gene Curation Coalition, or GenCC, terms that were approved and supported. So again, here is that information blown up. So this is telling you when you would when you should use the no known disease relationship, as well as how you would apply that within the gene curation interface. So evidence collection, we did outline applicable types of evidence. It is preferred to use peer-reviewed literature, but we also accept that there are additional resources such as variant databases and case report databases that may be used in order to apply evidence to your curation. As long as everything has a PMID, use of each type of evidence is at the discretion of the expert panel. Also, we provide recommendations if you're using a database for information, including that you would want to use the same the same label that was used on the site for the identification, and as well as adding the URL for the case information in the explanation section of the GCI when scoring the associated variant. An example of this would be the Decipher database. That has a lot of case reports. You would want to use whatever the label is within the Decipher for that particular individual, as well as providing that URL so that we can track back and have transparency of that information. We also expanded the useful publication search engines to include LinkBar, which you can search by variants of interest or using a RefSeq, or by genes using an HGNC gene symbol, as well as Mastermind, and have included whether those are freely available or cost. Also, in Appendix A, we expanded a lot to have a lot of curatorial tools that may have PMIDs of evidence that we can actually use and score on for our gene curation. And so you'll see for each one of these, we've highlighted whether it would be gene expression, protein interactions, or mouse models, and we have provided a PMID to this. So again, you can go to these resources like Human Protein Atlas, look up where your particular gene of interest is expressed, and use this PMID to be able to score on the information in the absence of an article within the literature by an expert group having that information. So we find this really useful for mouse models. We had just reviewed the Knockout Mouse project, so this is a really great way that this project has shown these particular knockout mice within the IMPC, and there is a PMID for that. So any mice within there that your group thinks is enough to score, you can use this PMID and explain out every information for it. So we don't need any comments or suggestions, and that is the end of our updates. Are there any questions?
Hi, this is Deb.
Yes.
My speaker might be a little hard to hear. Sorry for that. How are these implemented in the GCI? I'm still a little confused on that as the new SOPs come out. I don't see anything where we can select, like, to have a certain SOP as we're curating, but maybe I've missed it. And I'm curating in a group right now, I think, that is staying with the same SOP they started with.
Really, some of the things that are accommodated on the GCI side is the fact that we added these new mode of inheritance. If you don't use them, you don't have to. But really, your scoring and anything like that really comes to each of those SOPs. It's a very good question, Deb. But if you've stayed on that right now and it's published, it will say that it's that particular SOP. However, I think in general, there would be an update saying that at this time where there's a release, that it may start saying that this was gene curation SOP version 7. I would definitely have to check back onto the developer side in Stanford to make sure of that. I think for how you apply your scores, that definitely you can keep consistent. And if we were to go look back at any of these publications here, So while we do update for the general gene curation and the new version on the website, you can always go into the additional supporting materials and scroll down, and you can find the previous SOP versions. They will show us archived documents, but they are there for you to be able to use. Really, the GCI is just updating any new types of information. As we said, you've now included the new semi-dominant mode of inheritance. So if we were to come into here, even on a demo, and start to log in information, we could simply come to look at a gene of interest. We can pick a disease, but what you will notice now is that you have undetermined mode of inheritance as well as semi-dominant, which were not there previously. If you don't want to use those because they weren't there for you to score on a previous event, you can certainly not choose to use them. However, we would encourage you to use them if your particular curation fits within these mode of inheritance. There have been no deviations at this point to the scoring or score ranges that we have. So all of those default scores should be the same. And again, every person has the ability to adjust those up and down. So really you can have your expert panel guide you on where they want to get points depending on the information provided for that specific variant or proband.
Courtney, I see a question from Kristen as well.
Sure.
Kristen, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? All right, I can go ahead and ask.
Okay.
It's about PMIDs. So Kristen wondered about why a PMID is required and use of each type of evidence is at the discretion of the expert panel. The speaker made it seem that evidence without a PMID can be used, but we were told that we cannot use case information from a lab's database. So can you comment on that?
Yes, no. So for gene curation, you have to have a PMID to even begin to score the evidence within the gene curation interface. So in the absence of a PMID, you cannot score any type of evidence. However, we can state that when there's not a score allowed, you can modify a classification. So we have had instances where there is a PMID provided for information, but it was really a large intragenic deletion, and we cannot score or have that variant scored on. In that case, we had modified the classification to bring back information that way. But in general, a PMID is required in order for us to score any type of information for gene curation at this time. That is different than variant curation that is trying to use applicable lab data, but at this time, gene curation is restricted to having a PMID. Hopefully I answered your question, Kristen.
So this is Deb again. So I'm still trying to understand what SOP is the gene curation interface on now? Is because it added those two options, now it's on SOP 7, or it's scoring from SOP 2 with options from 7? I'm just confused about it.
That's why I said I need to talk back with Stanford on that. It should be that any time that we make an update, it should come to be updated to the new gene curation SOP version 7. It may not display that at this time. However, we can speak with Scott or anyone else as well. But generally, when we have made these updates, then that is a measure for the Stanford and interfaces to update that version on the gene curation interface, as well as with the website. It would update to tell you that at this time, any curation that has been published should be in accordance with this new SOP. Is that a little clearer, Deb?
It is. I mean, I have a feeling this is something that's on the Stanford GCI VCI to-do list, which is to make it clearer which SOP is being used and to give the option for groups to stay on a certain SOP if that's what they started with and what they want. But when I go look at like a gene curation record now, there's nothing that says what SOP it is. I think in the hereditary cancer group, we've been putting in what SOP or have made a note of what SOP, but there's nothing that shows on the website, on the gene curation interface, that says you're using this one or this was curated with this one?
I think most of the evidence that comes through, if I can get it to come up, is going to be on that last classification matrix.
Right.
But if I were to come here, and I want to look at the hyperlink, it should be able to say the SOP. So it says version 6, so that will be updated shortly into version 7. So that's one area on this ending SOP summary.
Where are you?
This was the link. So this is the evidence summary link here.
Summary link.
Yep. And then if we go into the classification matrix.
I see where it says at the top, evidence
Yep.
summary. Okay. I had looked at so you're at the classification matrix. It's not on that page, right? That's where I was.
Nope, it's only within the link. I'm just showing you all different areas. The best way when you have a published one is to click the hyperlink on the very first page, but if you happen to be in the matrix page, you can find it either where that link is, or if we scroll down, and I'm trying not to go too fast, you can also find it in your provisional and approved summary.
Okay, and that is input by curators, or that is by Stanford?
No, that is an automatic association based on the update. That is not something that is chosen at this time.
Got it. Okay.
Does anyone have any other questions?
Hey, Courtney, I have a gene for one of my groups that's dominant, dominant, and recessive, depending on different subtypes. So, would we, if we wanted to get some help, would we send it to the lumping and splitting committee for their comments? Would it go to the small group for gene curation? Or is there someone we should email?
Yeah, you can definitely come to any of those groups, really. If it really is looking at the disease entity and whether you should lump or split between the autosomal dominant recessive or make it all semi-dominant, we can certainly help you in the lumping and splitting working group. We can also attempt in the gene curation small group. If you contact me, Erin, Riggs, Jenny, or Marina DeStefano, we can certainly take a look and help guide you through that as a first pass. And if we need any other types of help, we can send it off to other groups.
Okay. And I guess I'm curious about the new option for unknown inheritance. Can you know an example of when we would use that?
Yes, I think we had some within the, let me go back here. And I would hate to say that Marina actually has this, but they've had some indications in hearing loss when they really didn't know if something was autosomal dominant or recessive, that there could be the semi-dominant. There was just too little information about the gene as well as how it was inherited and whether phenotypes were ruled out. So again, it's on this basis of a lack of really salient information. And so they went into saying it had an undetermined mode of inheritance. So this is when there is an implication for gene, but it is really not clear whether it's autosomal dominant recessive or it could be that semi-dominant. And again, that's just for lack of either functional evidence or more supportive variation. So if there's only 2 individuals that are asserted for this particular gene disease relationship, you may not have enough cases to really be able to say out what the inheritance pattern is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And in one of my groups, we have an interesting predicament where it's traditionally been called recessive. That's the classic form. But it turns out that some carriers do have symptoms, and it's autosomal. And so I think this is going to become probably more prevalent. So that's a nice option.
Yes. And so this is kind of the area here, establishing the mode of inheritance. If you all haven't seen it, the gene disease mode of inheritance, we do have each one of these sections lined out, and so you will have mode of inheritance, what we consider for those, as well as information and examples for them, how you may want to use some of the other scoring classifications as well as the table. So we really would encourage you that this was a very big revamp of the SOP, that if you have not read this, it would be worth your while to go through and see all of the different information we put. And thank you for your question, Christy, and please definitely direct it to us, and we would be glad to help you.
Thanks.
Courtney, any other questions for Courtney? And please do feel free to contact Courtney or any other members of the small gene creation working group if any additional questions come up.